All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's annual symposium. My name is Heliana Melendez, and I'm a research analyst working with CNA's Project on American Justice. I'd like to go over a few helpful tips as we begin today's session. Please keep your phones or computer audio on mute to avoid background noise. This session is being recorded, so you and others may view it later on our website. We will take questions at the end of the session. If you have a question for one of the panelists, please use the chat function to direct the question to the host at any time during the session or raise your hand during the Q&A section at the end. Please edit your display name by hovering over your name, clicking More, choosing the Rename option, and changing your screen name to reflect your full name and agency so that we and others may know who you are and where you're from. And as a reminder, points of view or opinions expressed herein do not necessarily represent the official position of the U.S. Department of Justice or other clients. Please reach out throughout the chat function if you have any questions during this session or throughout the symposium. And with that, I'll pass it off to Tom Woodmansey, Principal Advisor at CNA, to begin this session, Violence Reduction, Exploration and Understanding of Various Data and Technology-Driven Approaches. Tom?
Thank you, Heliana. Welcome, everyone. As Heliana mentioned, I'm Tom Woodmansey. I'm a Principal Advisor with CNA. And I'm also a retired police officer where I did 25 years in Madison, Wisconsin. And I spent about half that time as a detective, and then I was a supervisor. And I'm really pleased to be part of this session and facilitating it. And I know you probably often hear we have a great panel, but we really have a great panel. And I think you're going to get a lot out of this. We've got Richmond Police Chief Rick Edwards, Dr. Sean Malinowski, and Dr. Dan Lawrence. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves in a minute and then turn it back to me. But I can tell you from working with all three of them directly, they know what they're talking about. They have tremendous research knowledge and very, very exceptional experience as a practitioners in the field. If I had to sum up in a few words my experience and what I think their approaches to policing, and I strive to have the same thing, is they're striving for continuous improvement. How can we improve the industry, help the communities through better improving police technology and approaches towards dealing with violent crime? So they're a great fit for this session. And so with that, Chief, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll go to Sean and Dan, if you wouldn't mind giving a brief introduction about yourself and your background.
Sure. My name's Rick Edwards. I'm the Chief of Police for the City of Richmond here in Virginia. And I've been with the Richmond Police Department for over 25 years now. I was named the acting Chief of Police in 2022 and the official Chief of Police about 9 months later in July of 2023. And I'm sure we'll get into it, but Richmond's got a myriad of challenges for a city our size, which is a population of about 230,000. We are a state capital, which brings with it specific challenges. And then Richmond historically has been an exceptionally violent city throughout my career and even before it in the 80s and 90s, when Richmond was, in 1994, was named the murder capital of the country per capita. So we're battling a lot of different challenges here, and I'm excited to kind of talk about some of the things that we're doing to try to keep violent crime in check in our city.
Thank you, Chief. Sean?
Yeah, hi, I'm Sean Malinowski. I'm retired out of the Los Angeles Police Department. I did 25 years there. I left there as the Chief of Detectives at LAPD, and I had also for a period of time been the Chief Information Officer under Charlie Beck. And since then, I've been working for the University of Chicago for a few years in Chicago. And then now I have a nonprofit. We're working in Miami and Miami-Dade. And I was the SSL in Philadelphia for this last round of PSP that's just ending this month.
Thank you, Sean. Dr. Lawrence.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. I'm a senior research scientist at CNA. I'm a police researcher through and through, so I don't have that practitioner experience, but I've done a lot of close work with police organizations across the country. My portfolio of research primarily focuses on how law enforcement agencies use different types of technologies. So a lot of study on body-worn cameras, gunshot detection technology, public surveillance systems. And part of the conversation that I'll have with you all today is in regard to these, what we refer to as crime analysis centers, where all these technologies sort of come together in one operational center. So I'm excited to talk more about that and some of the work that we're doing on those.
Thank you all. And before we jump into the panel discussion, which is really the most important part of this session, I just want to touch on a few things from my experience with the topic as it relates to violent crime, addressing it through data technology and evidence-based approaches. In my 25 years as a police officer, and then in my last 8 years as an advisor with CNA, I've been fortunate to work with a lot of police departments around the country on violent crime strategies. And a few things that I've noticed that stand out to me, and I'm speaking in general terms and in my opinion, and these are kind of overarching themes, is police really want to be effective in keeping communities safe. They want to do things the right way and the best way. Police understand that arrest and incarceration is not the solution to changing violent crime. And police, for the most part, very much welcome learning from others and collaborating to help keep their communities safe. And I think they are pleading for this now more than ever, actually asking what more can other people do to help us keep our communities safer. And I think they're continually looking for new and innovative strategies to help them. I think the general public would be surprised how many conferences and trainings that police have available to them that they go to try and improve. But one thing I think is evident from my own experiences and what I've observed is police don't often or do it enough. They don't evaluate if what they're doing is actually having an impact. Is it reaching their goals? And they end up sometimes doing the same thing over and over again and expect the different results, but just don't know. So the data evidence-based approaches are so important to help them avoid this cycle. And I'm just going to touch on a few approaches before we dive in that are out there. Some of you probably have heard of these or familiar with them, and I'm not going to dive deep, but I think it's important to know some of the strategies and approaches that police use that are evidence-based and technology assists with them. First of all, community-oriented policing has been around, from my experience, since the 70s, and that involves having the community be active participants in policing. ComStat, and I see Dan Oates is on this session as an audience member. He's an expert in data-driven direct responses to addressing crime that departments are using. Place network investigations, or P&I. I view that as hotspot policing, identifying geographic areas with high volume and focusing on that. Another approach that's been around for about over a decade now, but is still very much in demand, is focused deterrence. This is a very focused approach on the most prolific groups and individuals who are driving the violent crime in communities and providing those people support and added accountability. And it's a collaboration with other partners, including community members. And then problem-oriented policing is a proactive approach. And what it does is it looks for root causes of the problem. What caused this? What contributes to this? It also is very collaborative. And then, as we all know, body-worn camera, a technology that's been around for several years now, but has really taken off in the past 5 to 10 years with police. And CNA has done a great deal of work with body-worn camera around the country. And I've noted that it was initially intended for accountability, to give some oversight to police behavior, which is good and is true. But we're also seeing the many benefits of promoting the good work that police do, increasing evidentiary value, observing use of force decision-making. And it also goes to officer wellness and an added element of transparency for the community to see what police are actually doing and the good work that they're doing. And then the last two, I'm just going to touch on a CVI, community violence intervention, another approach that is becoming more and more prevalent. And it's a community-driven approach that addresses violence and crime in communities. Artificial intelligence, by no means am I an expert on this, but we're already seeing some impacts in policing, and I'm sure our panel might touch on some of this. It'll be interesting to see where it goes in the future. But the bottom line is, no matter the approach, the strategy, or the technology, the key really is effective implementation and measuring the outcomes. If the data is sound and the strategy is rooted in evidence-based approaches, police will see more and more success. So Sean's going to be touching on this, but obviously what we see more and more, and honestly, it's been this way in my entire career in policing, is the limitations with reduced staffing, just trying to stay afloat and address the violence in our communities. So the intent of utilizing data technologies and evidence-based approaches is to really help police do more with less, be more efficient, be more effective, because staffing isn't going to get any better, as I think we all know. So now I'm gonna ask the panel some questions, and as always mentioned with this, we'll go through the panel Q&A, but please keep your questions. You can put them in the chat. We're gonna hold time for sure at the end of the session to field your questions, or if you have observations about the topic, we welcome them as well. So I'm going to start off with Chief Edwards. And Rick, in 2020, it was a difficult year for all policing after the murder of George Floyd. And in your agency, Richmond, and your community had a particularly difficult summer with 120 days, you told me, of civil unrest and protest. Can you talk about how that affected your department and your ability to address violent crime?
Sure. Well, to your point, Tom, when we talk about 2020, the first thing that has to be discussed from our context, and urban police departments around the country have seen this as well. So when we started in June of 2020, when my predecessor was the chief, right when the civil unrest started, Richmond had 740 sworn officers. That's just the sworn side. When I took over in October of 2022, we had 603. And, so that's 20% reduction in staff. And my first order of business when I took over, and we're still maintaining that threshold, was to address violent crime while not having the resources we used to have. And to do that, I got my team together, and we realized very quickly we had to kind of play Moneyball. If you know the movie or the book Moneyball, where the Oakland A's had to really think strategically to fight crime. That's what we did. So one of the first orders of business was to look through my staffing and civilianize what I could, put every good guy with a gun back in some sort of enforcement capacity, and try to civilianize some of those roles that had previously been done by sworn members. And it didn't take long for the effect of 2020 to impact Richmond, again, like what we saw in urban environments around the country. So Richmond, as I mentioned, in the uptake, has always been a violent city, but we went from 66 murders in 2020 to a 36% increase the following year in 2021 of 90 murders, and just a significant amount of shootings. And while at that same time we're losing staffing due to what I believe was morale issues after being demoralized as a police department, we saw a 70% reduction in traffic stops. That's just a quick snapshot indicator of what your police department's willing to do to look for crime. We were still obviously responding rapidly to emergencies. We're still doing our job, but when I talked to the rank and file officers, they had legitimate and pervasive concerns about doing proactive work and looking for that suspicious behavior that we need to drive violent crime down. So, we really looked at the need to improve our technology, which, Richmond at the time was going through, in 2021, we were accepted as a PSP city. So, we really started taking advantage of some of those benefits that PSP offered us, as far as looking what other cities were doing with their real-time crime centers, and implementing technology for us. License plate recognition is a total game changer on how our investigators are able to impact crime, along with the proliferation and remote access to video surveillance. So we were able to be more effective and efficient with that technology use. And then the other issue was trying to build back that morale, so our officers felt comfortable doing police work again. And we've slowly been able to do that. We've also, looked at some of the strategies, and we might be able to get into that more, but some of the strategies to make us more effective and efficient with the officers we do have. So that's kind of what we looked at, and how we've been able to fight back against that upward crime trend. And I'm happy to say, and when we do a 2-year comparison of where the 2 years before we took over to where we are these last 2 years, we're down 20% in overall murders. Our gun violence our overall violent crime is down 15%. Our shootings are down. So we've been able to bounce back. while still having a very small footprint with our police sworn side. So we're just we're learning how to be more effective and efficient with the resources we do have through strategy and technology.
Thanks, Chief. And I'm really glad that you highlighted morale more than once in your discussion. This sometimes gets not looked at strong enough. And as the leader of your organization, I know that's really important. And you mentioned PSP, and I'm glad, Melissa, for everyone's awareness, put it in the chat what that is. It's really worth taking a look at. So, Sean, I'm going to ask you, I touched on it, but this is about staffing and retention. Given the shrinking number and challenges in hiring and retaining officers, how can departments effectively balance the need for visible police presence with a limit in their workforce?
Yeah, so, it's not just our perception of it. The research that's out there, based on some survey research that was done through PERF and through Major City Chiefs, the numbers came back about 70% of police chiefs said they're experiencing challenges in hiring officers, and 65% or so are having trouble retaining officers for some of the reasons the chief has mentioned. And also what the chief was talking about is I also see a change in how aggressive or proactive officers are being in the field. And in fact, as a leader, it's very difficult, I think, for a watch commander or for a captain or someone running a district to get up in front of a roll call and say, yeah, be aggressive, go out there, get guns, because it's not the same as it was maybe when they were working patrol. And so they're having trouble making that argument. And I also feel like officers that I talk to in some of the cities, they're busy. They're certainly busy with radio calls. But I think when the chief came on the job, and certainly when Dan Oates came on the job, I think the volume was a lot higher in terms of radio calls. However, we didn't have as much other things to worry about in terms of body worn and other things. So, it's a balance, and perception's reality. These cops are going from call to call as far as their experience. So some of the things that they had asked me to talk about, I've been involved with CNA now for, I think my first contact was probably 2008 or something when we did smart policing in Los Angeles. And that's where I really started to learn some things. We had Dr. Craig Yoshida come in, if you know him. He came out and taught us all about place-based and what we should be doing there. He taught us about setting up a crime intelligence detail for the first time. And he really changed the way that we were providing policing services in Los Angeles. And we had a lot of resistance to it because, like most departments, LAPD thought, no, we don't need anything we're not going to learn anything from some guy from Washington, D.C., and we learned a lot. And generations now of officers have come through and been trained. And so on that one little program we did, Smart Policing, it was a couple $100,000. It was even predated Public Safety Partnership. We ended up in Newton Division, which used to be called Shooting Newton. So that'll give you an idea of what it was like before PSP. Craig came in, and that one year we had a stretch of about 4 or 5 months without a homicide in Newton, which is unheard of. And in the end, we ended up under about 22% in shootings and overall down 12% in violent crime. So people are competitive on LAPD, and they got on top of that. So it was just about being in the right place at the right time, concentrating on the right offenders, all stuff that you guys know. And then I came to Miami, and I was working in Philadelphia with PSP, but when I came to Miami to help out here, I saw Dan Oates was here actually as the SSL when the project began. Tom Woodmansey came in later, and this is a great department in Miami. It's about 500,000 people. They had about 1,500 officers. They're down to about 1,200 now. And we had a tough year here in 2021 when PSP started. Dan could tell you all about it. And he came in, and for a department that had, a history of having Timoney, Chief Timoney was down here and changed a lot of things, got them squared away on CompStat. But they did not have a great data infrastructure, and they did not have a lot of crime analysis going on. So I think the influence of Dan Oates and CNA and later Tom Woodmansey, they really elevated the analyst, and they made huge strides in terms of professionalizing those jobs, brought in some people from the local university who had doctoral degrees that started modeling how that could be done. And so when I got here, we found that we had a much better functioning department. So when you look at the numbers here in Miami, just from concentrating on analysis, and improvements to CompStat and all of the real-time crime center work that was done under CNA and PSP. When I got here, we had 61 homicides, if you guys remember, and that's a lot for them here. And this last year, they ended with 31 homicides. So that's the lowest number they ever had. They were hovering in the high 40s to 50s for a while. That seemed to be their natural rate. To get down to 31 is pretty impressive with 500,000 people. This year, we're up a couple. And, you know, the funny thing is the pressure is already on these guys. It's, you know, it's like, well, what have you done for me lately? They're up 3 homicides off of an all-time never recorded low, and people are not happy. You know, this is a city that had 220 homicides in 1985. So people should be glad. I mean, we're in a pretty good spot. Now, given that, we still have a long way to go, though, in terms of getting officers to deliver on patrol missions. And that's, I think, what you guys wanted me to talk about mostly is, what do we do with lack of personnel? Well, we're trying to do the kinds of things that Chief Edwards talked about, motivate people to get out there. There's not much we can do to force officers to follow through on these missions. It's really not about discipline. We went through that in LAPD where we were so hard on the commanders and the captains and the lieutenants that, you know, it was pushed down on those officers. That just is not working anymore. They'll shut down on you. I never thought that was the case, but we do have pushback from officers going into violent areas now. And, you know, my people that I work were saying, we've never heard that before. Are they afraid to go in? I don't think the officers are afraid to go in and work these areas. I think they're afraid to go in and get in trouble by enforcing the law in these areas. So it's not the same expectation they had. So what we're trying to do is use technology. There's a lot of information that we're able to build off of dashboards that the department had access to that software. We just brought some experts in, and we're helping them visualize the data. And, you know, every few months, it seems we get a shuffle in the personnel at the district level. And that's just the turnover that we're seeing. So we have to retrain command staff on, you know, your people are doing the right thing. They are targeting the right people. And this is how CompStat's supposed to work. But I think in the future, what we're going to see, I think Tom wanted me to talk about, is this demand reduction idea of what can we get rid of in terms of police, you know, responsibility, so that we can do more, get more hours into patrol. So I think we are going to see trends with, you know, drone as first responders, certainly taking some of the radio calls off. I think the claim is about 25% of radio calls in some of these cities are handled before we have an officer dispatched. And then also, you know, having the technology to go out and find other resources. So some cities have just given up responding on some things, and people have to report those via technology or a kiosk or an app. We also have companies who are wholesale being, you know, substituting what officers used to do. So many cities I'm visiting don't do traffic collisions anymore. They'll send a private company out there to do traffic collision reports. In some cities, that's freeing up thousands of hours of officer time. And then also, I think I kind of brought this up to Miami and they didn't take me seriously, but there is going to be a role here at some point for autonomous vehicles in patrol. If people don't believe that's true, they should just look at 10 years ago on drones. You know, aerial drones, 10 years ago, we tried to get it done in LAPD. People laughed at us, people cursed at us, and now this is a whole industry. And I think we're going to see that. You're going to see some roles taken over by autonomous vehicles. It's already happening in security companies. They're sending out vehicles that are driving themselves and taking some burden off of officer, at least for visible deterrent patrol. So I think those are a couple of things, Dan, that you guys wanted me to talk about. Dan is on the phone with us. He was a great partner for me in Philadelphia, and have to thank him for all his support there. Did a great job and really huge difference in Philadelphia, thanks to CNA and PSP as well.
It's great, Sean. Appreciate it. And it's real clear that there's so much you could talk about with this topic in our limited time, but you're making me think about some additional follow-up questions. Dan, I'm going to turn to you if you could talk about CNA's study on crime analysis centers and how they apply to efforts to reduce crime. A very important topic. You've got expertise in it. I view this as evolving. I know when I was a police officer, our crime analyst unit could have been utilized more than it was. So talk about that, Dan.
Sure thing, Tom, and it's certainly evolving. So through a study funded by the National Institute of Justice, CNA recently began work last year to learn more about how agencies are increasingly integrating technologies and data-driven strategies to guide their public safety and crime reduction strategies. So specifically in this study, we're examining what we refer to as crime analysis centers. And these are used to coordinate and integrate crime analysis efforts and technological capabilities into a single operation. And these centers do a ton of different things that we're learning. So they examine crime and call for service trends. They conduct offender briefings and do threat identifications. They use numerous different technologies like gunshot detection technology, CCTVs, license plate recognition, readers, social media. They also prepare routine reports. They partner with federal agencies or regional agencies. They direct patrol officers, and there's a whole slew of other characteristics associated with these centers. But to begin our work on this topic, what we really wanted to do was first, excuse me, first identify the types of centers that exist, because there are different types, and offer firm definitions for them, because that currently doesn't exist in the field. Once we had that done, we would want to then examine the literature on the impact that these centers have had on crime and other crime-related outcomes, such as clearances. So we've recently completed what we refer to as a scoping review. It's where we review the literature to identify we did a scoping review to identify the different impacts that these centers have. And we were able to identify mainly 4 types of centers that carry out these types of activities. So I'm going to briefly define them here. The forthcoming article that's under review for publication, it has a little bit more detail. But the 4 centers include, first, fusion centers. So this is a pretty well-known type of center, and it's a state-operated entity that really disseminates critical information that's specifically related to terrorism and counterterrorism efforts. The second one is crime gun intelligence centers. So these were first launched in 2016 with support from the ATF, and they facilitate the collection and processing and distribution of intelligence data about crime guns, mass shootings, and other major shooting incidents. Next are a very popular real-time crime centers. So these are operational centers capable of delivering information to officers in rapid time en route to either crimes in progress or incidences that have recently occurred. And finally, the newest, and which is also the most poorly defined type of center, is what we refer to as crime information centers. But these are actually, they come from Chicago's police department's strategic decision support centers. That's where they first started. And while these centers share some similarities with real-time crime centers, they're distinct in that they're implemented in a much smaller geographical area, such as a district, rather than across an entire agency, city, or region. They're also specific to the agency. They don't really include other agency partners, regional partners, or federal partners. And they're meant to produce actionable, localized information for district command to execute proactive policing activities. So RTCCs are much more reactive and responding to crime in a very short period of time, whereas CICs are meant to be proactive and get officers directed to areas to conduct patrols and reduce crime opportunities. So in terms of our scoping review that we did, those are the 4 centers. And after identifying roughly 530 publications that are out there that mention these types of centers, we were able to filter that down to just 31 studies with 38 publications that studied the impact of these centers, what they've had on crime-related outcomes. And I'll just quickly note that the vast majority of these, 18 of them, focus on fusion centers, which makes sense because they've been around the longest. 8 focus on crime gun intelligence centers. Only 3 are on real-time crime centers, and only 2 are on the newer crime information centers, and both of those are specific to Chicago. So the main takeaway here is obviously that there's not much research on these very popular policing programs and operations. But it's also worth noting that the research that is out there is actually not very rigorous in their methodologies. So examining the impact that they have on crime and clearances is somewhat challenging. That said, the research on RTCCs, real-time crime centers, and CICs, while there are only a couple of studies here and there, they are a little bit more methodologically rigorous, and they do have stronger support that these centers can improve criminal investigations of various different types of violent crime measured by different, looking at and also increasing crime clearance rates. So there's a lot here to say about these centers, but I'll leave it at that for now. And I would emphasize for the researchers on the call that there's a lot more research that's needed in this area. And our NIJ study will be working with 4 agencies that are implementing crime information centers. So the study itself is focused on crime information centers. So we're looking forward to getting that work out into the field as we learn more.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that. I'll go back to Chief Edwards. So, Rick, you touched on strategies for Richmond PD. Can you give us a little mini case study about the specifics of the Richmond Police Department's violence reduction efforts, an overview? And I'm also curious, how do you get familiar with the most innovative and new strategies that are available? How did they come to you at the top of your organization, if you wouldn't mind?
Sure. Well, before becoming the chief of police, I was the liaison to the National Public Safety Partnership, as I mentioned earlier. So very early on, I was offered a lot of training and peer exchanges and expertise from other police departments. And but one of the tactics that I was interested in after 2020 as a precinct commander, again, what I was finding was officers were unwilling to engage. So what I wanted to do was get every officer involved in some way. So we came up with a deterrent side of our strategy, a proactive side, and then a community focus. And the deterrent side is mainly based upon the Coper curve, as many people are aware of. Chris Coper, a criminologist from George Mason, had this theory of deterring and disrupting crimes by hotspot visits. So when I did it as a precinct commander, I learned some lessons on what not to do with that philosophy. And then when I became chief, I implemented it citywide. And then, unlike other things that police departments will set goals for, we never want to set goals for things that are going to get our officers in trouble, like felony arrests, traffic stops, things like that. We don't want them to feel that pressure. But this was, hotspot visits, which is for those that aren't familiar, the Coper curve is a 10 to 15 minute visit in a designated area that is non-enforcement in nature. So it's, officers are outside their car, they're maybe talking to people, but they're not running, checking for warrants, they're not patting people down. If they're on one of these visits and it turns into a arrest, then it just transitions to something else. But the actual visit is a 10 to 15 minute visit at random intervals that can't be tracked, and they can't be specifically routine at the same time, same place every day. So what I asked when I became the chief, what I asked our crime analyst supervisor to do was to break our city down into 1 to 3 block areas. And when you look at the city of Richmond, she came up with 29,000 of them. And I said, all right, well, let's rank order them and let's focus on gun violence. So we looked at very specific crimes and we thought a lot about what crimes we wanted to focus on. And first were gun-related homicides, non-fatal shooting aggravated assaults, non-fatal shooting robberies, shooting into an occupied dwelling, and shooting into an occupied vehicle. And we added the last two. Those are crimes in Virginia that aren't tracked as a part 1 or 2 crime. So we're not judged upon that for statistical purposes. But what we found in Richmond is that particularly shooting into occupied dwellings was a very significant indicator on future violence. So it was almost, certainly there were ones where you shot at someone, missed, and hit a house that's unrelated. But when we saw people doing drive-bys on homes, we wanted to really analyze why they were picking that particular home. And oftentimes we find gang involvements, disputes that started in school, or other issues. So when our analysts broke that down, we came up with a list of the top 24 hotspots in Richmond, and we had our officers, again, as the deterrent strategy, set goals for these hotspot visits in those 24 hottest spots in Richmond. And again, that's something that we track through our CAD, that at our command staff meetings on a weekly basis. We have a weekly meeting, we have a weekly meeting that is on monthly stats, and we hold our precinct commanders accountable for those stats. If the hotspots are not, if those visits are not are down from what the goals are, we want to know why. And sometimes there's good reasons, and sometimes there's not good reasons, and we want to hold those commanders accountable for setting that goal. in ways, like I said, that we wouldn't hold them accountable for traffic stops or felony arrests. The second part, the proactive strategy, again, learning through PSP, we took seminars on place network investigation, and that is something that we are always, and the way I think about and how we do place network investigation is almost like CPTED for a neighborhood. So crime prevention through environmental design, looking at the total issues of the problem and trying to find a way to solve it. So the example of that would be in the center of Richmond, we have the main street of Richmond is called Broad Street. It is where our convention center is. It's where all the hotels and restaurants and things if you come to Richmond, that's the main street. Well, we had a very concerning issue with gun violence on that street and an open air drug market. So we worked closely with the precinct commanders and our narcotics division to analyze why drug dealing was happening in this particular part of the city. And we looked at it, we set up surveillance, we found that there was a bus stop that enabled people to stand there all day and not arouse suspicion. So we worked with our bus authority and they moved that bus stop off that particular corner. They were also hiding some drugs in bushes along the corridor. We had Department of Public Works come and pull that. We had one of our businesses that was providing Wi-Fi passwords to people. So drug dealers, when we would debrief the drug dealer arrest, we would ask, well, why are you standing in front of this store? And they would say, well, we were able to have burner phones and not have service that come back to our names, and they just allow us to use their Wi-Fi, and we can make Wi-Fi phone calls to do our drug dealing. So we meet with the owners and they shut that off and don't give out that password to their customers, and it shut that part down. So it's a way of addressing specific problems by thinking outside the box, and we've had some real success, and then getting people to buy in. So, and then there's also the members of the community get to participate in that. Right now, our current P&I is in an area, it's revolving around a very problematic hotel that is, we've had 3 homicides at those hotels. We've got 330 calls for service over the course of years for that specific hotel, for drug overdoses, for just various complaints, everything from shootings to overdoses to prostitution to loud music complaints, and it's drawing a lot of our resources. So now we're hopefully the hotel owner is working with us, but the stick in that case is we're talking about civilly trying to seize that hotel if they don't comply with some of the very modest requests that we're asking of them, to increase lighting and to knock down a fence in the back and to paint over the graffiti that's available. So, the P&I is a part of that. And then, again, looking to be more effective and efficient, we had our local university, Virginia Commonwealth University, came in and did a patrol staffing analysis, which we haven't done since almost 20 years, to look at our borders for our sectors and our precincts to determine the population has changed in our city, but we haven't changed with our deployment. Like how many officers were authorized for precincts, what the lines and the borders are. We had a whole analysis done on Richmond is cut in half by the James River. So we have precincts that are on both sides of the river, which has always been frustrating to me. I never understood why we did that initially 20 years ago, and they recommended us not doing that. So we're going to be implementing that. Partnerships have never been more important to us with our staffing concerns. So for the last 2 years, we've had Operation Safe Summer with the Virginia State Police, with our federal partners, looping them into a monthly ComStat for our federal and state partners, which they weren't really used to. So every month now we're meeting with those partners, talking about crime trends, talking about specific offenders, talking about where they are in their investigations. And every agency has their own specialties and what they're willing to do. So while the special agents with ATF may not want to jump in the cars with our detectives anymore, they may be willing to adopt more cases. They may be willing to make controlled gun buys. They may be willing to do other things that all feed towards this focus on these 24 hotspots for us. So that's where it all comes back to. And finally, we have a community-based focus as well, where resources are given to those hotspots. We have a violence interrupters. We call them the Richmond Community Mediators program, that focus on, this was something our crime analysis unit that I asked them to do, and it's It's a very powerful stat that I'm able to talk to when we're talking to either whether it's parents or prosecutors or judges. We found that we looked at the last 3 years of data of juveniles that have been shot. 26.3% of Richmond juveniles who have been shot and wounded or shot and killed previously have been arrested by the Richmond Police Department with a firearm. And so knowing that data, knowing how important that is our potential victim pool, we are working with our mediators to address that effectively. And it's the #1 indicator for us. So we had them look at prior involvements in motor vehicle theft, simple assaults, robberies, and by far the biggest stat was 26.3% is that prior arrests. So it's just a big flashing red light. If your child is arrested with a gun by a Richmond police officer, you can extrapolate that a quarter of those individuals are going to be shot before their 18th birthday in Richmond. And it enables us to focus on what is a widespread, disparate problem very narrowly on those potential victim groups. We also have that same group looks at, we have a program where we give away free gun safes. We used to give the gun locks away, but what we realized is nobody uses those. But these safes are being used, and we're giving those away to people who may have a gun but don't have enough money or just haven't taken the time to safely store their guns. So we have a whole program on that. We have interventions on accidental shooting. So people that accidentally shoot themselves have been shown to be in high-risk behavior and are in need of services. And then we also do a gun buyback once a year, which, I think we get, there's a lot of different thoughts on that. I'm not super sold on it, but it is a program that allows guns that are sitting around a house that maybe a grandfather had when he passes away, and there's a bunch of guns in the house. We can give gift cards to people to turn those guns into us so that they're never used in a crime. They're never taken into one of our schools, used to hurt someone. They're never accidentally picked up by a toddler and used to kill themselves. So it's an all-encompassing, overarching process that I think we're trying to do. Like I said, it's that mindset of playing Moneyball with all the data we can to be as effective and efficient. And like I said, for the first year last year we had a 7% reduction in violent crime. This year we're on track for 8% reduction with a significant reduction in homicide. So and all while doing that with a much smaller police force than we've had in years past.
Yeah, Chief, it's impressive how you know so much detail about the operations and strategies. And I'm imagining your officers don't have the right to say the chief's not really sure what's going on out here. You know it in great detail, and that's impressive. And I really like how you highlighted the importance of effective collaboration with your other partners as well. So let's transition to Sean with this question. And I feel this question goes directly to the core of the session. And I view it somewhat as data accountability and integrity. How can we ensure that the data used to drive patrol and mission development is accurate and actionable when integrating new technologies?
Yeah, so this is a problem that, I just spent the summer going around to real-time crime centers. I think I visited 20-something real-time crime centers, maybe 28, I think I'm at now. My team is visiting about 50. And so we have a standardized questionnaire we're using for that. And it keeps coming up about data. And departments are difficult. I mean, it's difficult for a department to talk honestly about their data problems. Like, they really have to let you in to look at the house. You have to look under the hood. And, it's difficult to get people to trust you to say, we're a friend, we're going to look at it. We're not here from the New York Times. We're not going to say you're trying to inflate your numbers or deflate your numbers. Because it's so important. If that data is not right, we're in the wrong place at the wrong time. We're looking at the wrong people and we're vulnerable. And so most of the departments that we talk to, if you spend some time with them, they'll say, yeah, it's not 100%. And it's really not realistic to be 100% when you're looking at category. I mean, we never got UCR right, really. We never were 100%. No matter how much we put a data integrity unit together. I mean, LAPD, I had about 300 homicides a year. And I had to have one person dedicated full-time to make sure I was counting homicides right. So you can imagine when you start getting down to ag assaults of various kinds, across 21 districts is not going to be, it's not going to be accurate. So what we do is we try to bring in data, people from outside. So last week, these data consultants could have been working on, PayPal transactions or something. And this week they're working on anomalies in crime data. So it becomes very apparent to them. And we also, through dashboarding, when we bring things into a dashboard and we show command staff, this is what your numbers are saying, they go, no, that's not right. Like they just know, like Chief Edwards, Chief Oates, you would know off the top of your head, Tom, when you're in where your numbers are supposed to be. And if you're looking at it in a visual way, it's easier for them to say, no, that doesn't look right to me, So we're doing all of those things. And, the fact is officers are not great at this. And a lot of times we've had officers, they're not trained for it. They brought in there for a few years to try to sort it out. Look, I wasn't trained or competent enough to be the CIO and LAPD. And you know why I was? I think I was the first one that had an iPhone. And they were like, oh, this guy knows technology, or I was the best at PowerPoint, so, we don't have the expertise. So I think what we're going to see, what I'm certainly advocating, and through my organization, we have the funding to bring in data infrastructure experts and just map the whole thing out like we would for any business and say, where are the holes in this system? Because officer confidence comes into play. I can tell you in Miami, we set up very quickly a GPS dashboard that showed how much time officers were spending where versus crime. And we got pushback immediately. People are like, that can't be right. I mean, you can't really iterate on these things in policing, because if you're wrong the first time, they're not going to give you the benefit of the doubt the second time, So we learned our lesson with that. It's like, okay, we can't show these guys things that are half baked and ask them to input on how to get it fully there. We have to really wait till we're accurate. So those are a couple of things that we're working on. But I would say if you're looking at your data and you're dismayed that it's not 100% accurate and that you're worried you're vulnerable, you and 17,999 other agencies probably are suffering from the same thing. What's revealing is that when I take a look at it, and this has been in LA, in Chicago and Baltimore and Philly and Miami-Dade, there's no malfeasance. Like somebody could try to write an article as an expose. They would not find that somebody was purposely cooking the books. They would find that there's a lot of gray area in the way crimes are defined. And then we threw a huge curveball at people and said, all right, now that you're half correct with UCR, let's go to NIBRs. And that just blew everyone's mind. And we also have states that are not set up for NIBRs. So you can have a very aggressive police chief that wants to go to NIBRs, that raised the money to do what they have to do to get to NIBRs, put a new records management system. If it's not set up that their state can accept it, then we're back to square one, and we're back really looking at UCR. The other thing is that the public is not caught up with NIBRs. And so we can't really, it's very difficult for us to explain the nuances between UCR numbers and NIBRs numbers one year to the next. And so most agents still reporting to the public the UCR number. And I think that's fine. I think it simplifies it. There's only 8 crimes and people can understand somewhat what those crimes are. But these things, as we get more defined in the data, they're going to be challenges. I mean, maybe not in the next few years, but 5 years from now, we got enough on our plate right now. And I get that from the chiefs a lot of times. They're like, hey, man, I don't want to worry about this kind of detail on the data. And I tell them, look, then don't let us do it. We got plenty of nerds that are willing to go in there and look under the hood, and you just have to trust us. So those are the kinds of things. And what I don't want to see is an officer or a chief have a story come out that they're trying to cook the books when they're not, because once that story's out, there's no taking it back, no matter how much you can. So I'm trying to tell people on the front end, let someone who is on your side take an objective look at this thing and make sure your numbers are right. Both so we have officer confidence when we roll out a program, and so that you don't get caught vulnerable in some kind of expose, because there are reporters out there that their whole reputation is built on the same story, writing the same story in different cities about inaccurate data.
Yeah, very, very well said. And I'm glad you added that last part, Sean. So thank you. So just a couple more questions. I'm going to ask Dan one, and then I'm going to ask Dan and Sean the same question, because I think they have different perspectives, or at least some additional information to share. So Dan, the many different technologies that crime analysis centers rely on, can you just talk to the audience about what some of the main ones are and how they work together to reduce or investigate crimes that people may not be aware of?
Absolutely. So I'll talk specifically to, so I mentioned the 4 crime analysis centers earlier. I'm going to keep this conversation specific to real-time crime centers and the crime information centers, because these are the centers that are really being rolled out across police agencies across the country. But a perfect example to answer your question, Tom, relates to gunshot detection technology. So I bring this up because Ken Novak and Ken is our chief scientist for the Center for Justice Research and Innovation. We recently had a publication come out in the last month that looked at gunshot detection technology and another term for that is ShotSpotter, which is the dominant vendor of it, but how it's used across police agencies. And it's technology that is used in both real-time crime centers to alert operators to a shooting event and get officers to the scene, as well as used in crime information centers. But when a gunshot detection technology alert goes off, there's a whole cascade of events of other technologies that are then integrated into that single event. So agencies can just use gunshot detection technology to get to the scene and drive through the scene, look for victims of a shooting or perpetrators or evidence of a shooting event, and that could be it. But an agency that's going to be most successful, especially in regards to these crime analysis centers, are ones though that use that initial event and then incorporate many other technologies. So as evidence is collected at the scene through shell casings, you can incorporate NIBIN, which is the National Ballistic Network through the ATF, which can then connect to other types of shooting events and identify offenders. E-Trace, so gun ownership, is another technology. Then as you're furthering investigations that stem from that initial GDT alert, you can lean on CCTV, or cell tower pings, or license plate recognition cameras. You can look into social media, who was in the area at the time and what are they posting. All of this also builds databases that can then be used to predict future events, predict where their hotspots are and that officers should be in specific areas to reduce the opportunities for crime. CCTV is a very prominent technology in both real-time crime centers and crime information centers. And one thing that I would mention about CCTV is, in most cases, it's predominantly used retroactively. So investigating known crimes that have happened with CCTV that was recorded to seeing if it picks up anything. But that being said, there are proactive uses of CCTV where camera operators will observe known drug houses or observe suspicious behaviors on the street. But with CCTV systems, one thing that's particularly interesting, especially in today's times, is the implementation of AI technologies into CCTV systems. So this was something that was a lot more sensitive maybe 5 years ago, but now with the release of it being much more mainstream, I think people kind of expect this sort of activity to happen. But with video analytics, which is an artificial intelligence, there are applications for CCTV systems where you can automatically detect crowd control. So people, coming together on a street corner and getting an officer there to, figure out what's really going on. Doing perimeter detection. So if an individual crosses a fence, it flags that for the camera operator, and then they're more aware of it across the thousands of cameras that they might be trying to monitor. There's object detection. So there's a lot looking at, especially for like public transit systems, looking at bags being left behind, but there's also object detection for weapons and guns. So that type of system can be integrated into a CCTV system to make it much more automated for the camera operators. And also connected to that are license plate readers, recognition cameras, as well as GTT. GDT, gunshot detection technology. So having cameras automatically turn to a GDT event, or having a hot list of wanted vehicles ping off of an LPR and notify the camera operator that that vehicle just went by. So all of that said, these technologies, these systems really excel when the technologies are all working together, integrated together. And you need strong staff that are knowledgeable across all these different types of technologies to really know which one to lean upon for a specific investigation, or for developing a report on crime trends, or using this data to support those applications of place network investigations. Or another one that I think is really fruitful for law enforcement agencies is risk terrain modeling. So using geographical layers of different types of buildings and parks and geographical structures to better understand where the crime I forget the specific term they use for risk terrain modeling, but where the crime is really developing from, and getting officers to those areas to then conduct those place network investigations to really figure out how crime is being structured in this area, and where those crucial aspects are. I thought what the chief said about the Wi-Fi access for the people on the street, I thought that was fascinating. That's something that you would never see a researcher think of, but that's such a crucial component that would certainly get people to an area and have them sit there and stay. So again, all the technologies that exist, there are a lot of them, and I know police departments are constantly being inundated with new vendors and new technologies and new flashy devices. But the success of crime analysis centers for real-time crime centers, or even crime information centers, is using those technologies in a way that sort of integrates them all together, so you can best either react to crime in a quick and fast way and get information to the patrol officers on the street, or use that information that's collected over time to better identify where those hotspots are, and then conduct those P&I, the place network investigations, and so forth, to really reduce opportunity for crime.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And I can't help but thinking when listening to you, the challenges for smaller agencies with some of what you've talked about, even mid-size, and that's a gap in policing with 18,000 plus agencies out there, how to be able to utilize much of what you talked about. But I think there's improvements coming, probably worth another whole session. So let's wrap up. I want to just a couple minutes, and Sean and Dan, this is a question I have for both of you, and you probably won't be able to answer it thoroughly, because we do want to see if there's any questions that are coming in from the audience with 15 minutes remaining. But Sean, first with you, what ways can communities develop initiatives to better integrate into their violent reduction strategies? And how can law enforcement collaborate with local organizations to sustain these efforts? Now, it's a big question, but I think it goes to collaboration, and we've all the panels touched on this to some degree. But any quick points on this, Sean, that you think are good for the audience to know? You're muted.
Yeah, I think so. We can. I think what we're seeing in jurisdictions now is we have squeezed a lot of the juice out of directed patrol in some places. So when it's being done well, and we have officers available, and they're not going from call to call, and they don't have a demonstration to deal with, then they can spend some time. Look, these guys are still going to get coffee and get their dry cleaning at some point. So, you can't expect 100% of their 10-hour shift, but you try to get them to do directed patrol. But the other thing I think that agencies are recognizing is it doesn't have to be all us. I mean, we have good data through risk terrain modeling. We have good data through ShotSpotter has Resource Router now. They have really, because of some of the criticism of Resource Router, I love how the vendors have changed this whole dynamic now. So it used to be a surveillance state. Now it's transparency. We're selling transparency now. Same product. But anyway, it's a good point. But what we are seeing is using that same data, instead of putting a cop on the dot, is putting someone on the dot that is a representative of the government or the community organization. We're excited about a thing coming up here in Miami, that we have hotspots policing that is working. And then we have risk terrain modeling that's coming on there's a little conflict between those two groups that, we just got them comfortable with hotspots, and now we're bringing risk terrain modeling in under a different program, and it's blowing their mind a little. But we want to use both of those types of technology to focus community development efforts. So for instance, instead of putting cops out there necessarily, we might see a time where you put, we have some local sponsors might bring out, Baptist Health might bring out a community health van or something, and we'll set up a substation out there. And then we're going to use data to drive this. So in the areas where we need police attention, we're going to put community attention. And so we might set up a pop-up grocery store that is like a pantry, or we might send out after-school tutoring. So basically, I know I have a problem at the corner of walk and don't walk. Let's take that corner over for us for the next week and provide some social services, so that for once the police are seen as the good guys that bring in social services to the community. And also I'm occupying a period of time. So we are going to pair it with an overtime officer that's going to give me a little bigger buffer. And you know how suspects are. I mean, if I have a burglary for motor vehicle or a shooting problem even, and we show up with a big event for a few days, they're just going to take those days off or go somewhere else. And then I can suppress that hotspot. So I think that's the way it's going. I mean, we're trying to seal up the cracks. There's a lot of stuff falling through the cracks. A lot of stuff that Dan talked about seals some of those cracks, allows us to save time. So I tell them, save time to shave crime. And it's the same thing when we're trying to make money. All of these people, like, that's why we have ATMs, and that's why we have self-checkout, is companies figured out, I don't have the people to do this anymore. It's too expensive. So let's use the technology to do it. So that's just a couple of comments. I know Dan and I have talked about this a number of times. So
Yeah, just to add to what Sean was saying, I mean, getting community involvement is critical in a lot of crime prevention operations. But what I would really emphasize is I cannot stress how many times I've studied in a technological intervention and conducted community member focus groups as part of that study. And just the misunderstanding, the implementation is just not understood by community members. They don't understand what technology is doing, how it's being used, what it's for, where it is. So one of the things with gunshot detection technology, it's very often implemented in areas of a city that have high volumes of shooting events. So most bang for your buck. But community members often think that it's implemented across an entire city, which really damages when shooting events happen outside of the GDT coverage area, because now the police department's not being notified. So those aspects of keeping the community informed of how the technology is being used, how all these things come together, is really, really important, so that the community can better understand what policing work really is, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about what police work really is. And all that being said, like, having their voice in these conversations, it's not just the police department telling them what technology is. It's also learning from the community. Community members are your best sources for information, and I know police know this very, very well. But having them be able to have access points to give you more information about, what type of areas or people or buildings should be highlighted or reviewed under these different types of crime analysis centers is really, really critical. And the best way to get that information is from the community itself. Most often, this comes from patrol officers, and having access points for patrol officers to connect to these crime analysis centers is also very important. That's something that we saw in Philadelphia, where patrol officers were able to feed information directly to their crime information centers, directly from the street, from what they learned from community members. So all that said, having community members be aware of what police are doing and how they're doing it with different technologies and crime information centers is important, but also giving them avenues to voice their concerns and work with their local patrol officers to then feed information to those centers is also important.
That's really good, both those responses. And I know you crunched the time for it, but I like Dan, because that was part of my opening comments too, is helping the community to better understand what the police are doing and how they can assist with doing what they're trying to do, because they're all on the same page if you really break it down. So I really appreciate that. So I want to, we have 10 minutes left, and I'm not pushing to stay on board with the time, but I want to throw it out to the audience. I'm not aware of any questions that came in. So this is the time, raise your hand or just go off mute and ask the panel any questions you might have right now, please.
Hey, Tom, Dan Oates here. I just wanted to offer a comment. I think that what Sean had to say about data integrity is truly, truly important. When I took over 3 different departments, that was the biggest hurdle. It wasn't that people weren't willing to embrace data-driven decision-making. It was months of finding a way to get accurate data to a place where we could make decisions based on it. So I just wanted to echo what Sean had to say with that regard. It is a perpetual challenge in our business.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. Glad you highlighted that. And one comment that came in, or question that came in, and it's a kind of a project the future, so I'm just going to throw it out to the whole group, is, basically what's next for technology and data-driven approaches. Do you see anything on the horizon that needs to be developed, refined, or what you're seeing from your expertise? So just throw it out to the entire group. And I know that's a predictive question.
I can tell you what I saw this summer, I think, if that would help you, Tom.
Sure.
So I think what we're seeing is, from technology standpoint, the vendors are running it now. The vendors are driving it. So one of the reasons we have real-time crime centers exploding, even though you look, I go places, they don't realize this. New York had one in 2008. It's not a new thing, but they really think it's a new thing. And it's because Fusus and Flock and all these guys are like pouring money into the marketing. And, I hate to say it, but I'm visiting and talking to a lot of chiefs, and the information that they have about technology is all from the vendor. And so I think that what has to change is we have to become better experts, or we got to bring some people in, or we got to set some guidelines up so that you can't have the technology companies running what we're using. And right now we are kind of at their mercy.
Yes.
They do a great job of convincing us that their technology can do everything. And we're not great consumers. I mean, myself included. I'm like, yeah, let's get it. Let's do it. Let's get that too,
Mhm.
And then I'm into it. I go, wait a second. Didn't you say that it could do this? And they're like, oh yeah, no, it could do that. And I'm like, no, I mean, now it can do it. They go, oh no, in the next iteration, it's going to do that. I go, that's a different answer, man. You're like, it sounds like a suspect now. It could do it, and then we already are stuck with this product. So I think what's got to happen is some kind of, what it might happen is regionalization might solve it. Because look, I was at MCAC and these multi-county analysis centers in New York, and they don't stand for it. I mean, they have an expert, and they have somebody from New York State Criminal Justice Authority who says, these are the recommended technologies. And then they have 11 centers throughout the state. Each of those centers has about, 10 or so police departments that work with them, or counties. And so look, they have 350 agencies in New York that are all operating on their own program, not being dictated by technology companies. So I think that might be a trend in the future, is we got to get our act together and be better consumers of technology.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I see more specialized civilianized positions and departments rather than doing what typically happens. Like you said, Sean, I've got the nicest phone, therefore I'm the expert. So question came in from a chief. I'll throw to the panel quickly. How do you see drones as first responders integrating into the suite of technologies already mentioned? Anyone want to take a stab at that, Dan Lawrence?
Sure. So this is an area that CNA has particular interest in. But I would mention there have been agencies that have already explored using drones to respond quicker to events. So I know that with gunshot detection technology, there have been pilot tests of drones flying out to where the alert came in at, because they can get there quicker and they can observe the area to see if any individuals or fleeing vehicles, things like that. So they've been using that way. Another way that drones have been commonly used is to search and rescue. So you can equip many different types of cameras onto a drone, and it can be used to, for infrared, looking for a body in a forest, for example. They've also been used for vehicle accident scene documentation. So I know, for example, drones can take 3D environments and better understand how vehicles were involved in collisions. And there have been some police agencies across the country that have been using them in that way. There's a lot more that drones are going to be likely used for in the future. So it's definitely going to be something that is implemented more and more. I would highlight, though, that one of the challenges with drones right now is that the DoD doesn't support the primary vendor of drones because it's a Chinese company. So that makes it particularly difficult for the most prominent drone that's used to be implemented in law enforcement agencies.
Yeah,
Great.
I can add to that too, Dan, just based on going around now this summer. DJI, I think, is the company you're talking about. They are, if they haven't been outlawed already, they're about to be. So the problem with that is they feel like there's a backdoor. If once they hook up to your network, they're able to get in. But what I think is going to happen is that these FAA's changing some of the policy, because right now we have to have that visual flight observer on a drone, and that's holding us back as an industry. It's changing, though, from what I understand, in the next few months or a year, so that you can rely on radar instead of having a visual observer. And I think that's going to blow the lid off this thing, and people are going to be able to launch drones from those nests out in the area. And if you can get some funding, and I bet there's going to be federal funding available at some point to kind of cover your area with drones, so that we will be taking some of the burden off patrol officers. So I'm excited about what's happening with drones. I would say my knowledge of drones this summer went from 0 to like 60. So I feel like I'm learning more and more about it. And there are people out there who are absolute experts on this stuff in policing. So that's exciting.
Yeah, and just for RPD, we are currently, one of the things that wasn't mentioned was our drones are a big part of our SWAT missions. So any tactical operation, they are clearing the structure before we send a human being in there, and it's already provided us with so much more officer safety and intel before we send those operators inside a dangerous situation. So, but I'm excited about the future of drone technology. I think it's going to change how we respond, how it will give access, and it will just amplify those responses to critical incidents in real time.
Great. Thank you all very much. This is a topic we could talk more and more about, but I want to thank the audience for your attentiveness and the questions, and especially thank the panel for their time. I hope that you found this valuable. And I'm going to turn it back to Heliana for our closeout of the session. So thank you all.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tom. And thank you to our panelists and our attendees. This concludes our second annual JRI Symposium. We hope you learned something new and enjoyed the panel discussion. Continue to follow our work, excuse me, on our website and through social media, and feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. Apologies if you hear the helicopter overhead. I live in Shootin' Newton, as Sean mentioned, so.
It shouldn't be Shootin' Newton anymore. It should be. No, it is. Okay.
It's still just a little bit, I'm sorry to say.
Okay.
But finally, we ask that you follow the link in the chat that I just dropped in there to provide us with some feedback on the sessions and the symposium overall. Thank you again for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.